At dawn, the scream of a power saw shattered the silence. Then Frank watched, helpless as strangers tore down the only ramp that let him leave his home. Rain poured, his wheelchair tipped. He screamed, and every neighbor closed their blinds. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The morning air had a sharpness to it. Early November, the kind of cold that made bones ache even if they hadn't been shattered by war. Frank Delaney, wrapped in his fraying Marine Corps jacket, eased himself into his wheelchair with a practiced motion, one that betrayed decades of repetition. The old ramp creaked beneath him, wood worn soft by rain and time. It wasn't pretty, but it was steady, dependable. Like him. The ramp curved down from his front door like a weathered arm extending toward the world. Every screw, every patch of mismatched lumber told a story. The winter he slipped, the summer a neighbor's son helped repaint the railing, the time he'd replaced the bolts himself, one-handed, in a thunderstorm. To Frank, it wasn't a ramp. It was independence. It was freedom. It was proof that he still had control over something. The neighborhood, Woodridge Lane, was picture-perfect on the surface. Lawns edged like razor cuts, mailboxes polished, driveways free of oil stains. A planned community, as if life could be ironed smooth and made uniform. But Frank never cared for perfection. He cared for function. Survival. He wheeled toward the mailbox, the tires making soft, hushing sounds over the concrete. His hands, thick with scar tissue, pushed rhythmically on the metal rims. He still had grip strength, though arthritis tried to steal it some mornings. Reaching the box, he opened it slowly, half expecting the usual. A VA appointment, maybe a grocery flyer, sometimes a letter from another vet. But that day, there was only one envelope. Thick. Official. HOA stamped in crisp letters at the top. He slid it open with a dull key and unfolded the letter. His eyes narrowed as they moved down the page. Violation, it read. $5,000 fine. The offense? Unsightly and non-compliant home modifications. And just below that, you are hereby ordered to remove the unapproved structure within 72 hours. Frank stared at the words, motionless. The ramp? Unsightly? His ramp, the only thing that made leaving the house possible, was now labeled an eyesore by people who never once knocked on his door, never asked about his scars, his missing legs, his battles with the VA. No warning, no discussion, just a fine. $5,000 he didn't have, a deadline he couldn't meet, a sentence that felt less like policy and more like exile. He looked down the street. Neighbors raked leaves, walked dogs, adjusted Christmas lights. No one looked his way. No one saw the paper trembling slightly in his lap, or the man who, for all his stoicism, had just been told, "You don't belong here." Frank sat across from Christine Parker in the HOA's converted office, once a laundry room, now sterilized by laminated rules and the persistent hum of a fake orchid-scented air freshener. The woman behind the desk did not sit. She stood like a sentinel, arms crossed over her pristine white blouse, a clipboard angled just so against her hip like it had the power to condemn. And in Woodridge Estates, it did. She didn't offer a seat, nor coffee, just silence and her trademark thin-lipped smile. Frank broke it first. "I got your letter." Christine arched an eyebrow. "Then I assume you understand the situation." He laid the letter down carefully, smoothing the creases. "The ramp's been there for years. It was cleared by the city inspector when I installed it." Her tone was icy, practiced. "This isn't about city codes, Mr. Delaney. It's about community standards. The ramp is, frankly, an eyesore. It disrupts the visual harmony of the neighborhood." He blinked. "It's not decorative. It's how I leave my home." She didn't flinch. "And I respect your service, but we all have to follow the same rules." Frank leaned forward, veins tense in his weathered hands. "I lost my legs in '71. The VA covered the surgery. They didn't cover polished oak rails or matching trim. That ramp is what I could afford, and it works." Christine's eyes flicked to the letter. "Be that as it may, your ramp lacks approved materials and design conformity. Pressure-treated wood and galvanized bolts aren't within the color palette guidelines." He stared, disbelieving. "Color palette?" She smiled, nothing kind in it. "Sir, aesthetics matter in Woodridge Estates." For a moment, something old and dangerous stirred in him. Some memory of authority unchecked, of orders barked without understanding. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from control. "That ramp's the only thing keeping me from being trapped." Christine tilted her head, calculated. "Then perhaps it's time you modernize, or move." The sentence landed like a slap. Silence settled. Outside, sprinklers clicked on like clockwork. Christine adjusted her clipboard, already done with him in her mind. He could see it in the shift of her weight, in the deliberate avoidance of his gaze. He wasn't a person to her. He was a non-compliant line item on a form. Frank stood slowly, gripping his wheels. "You're really fining me $5,000 for surviving." She didn't answer, because to her it wasn't survival, it was a blemish. The noise came before the light, a jagged, whining roar that sliced through dawn's fragile quiet. Frank's eyes snapped open. He knew that sound. Not from nightmares, but from life. The high-pitched scream of a circular saw, biting into something that didn't ask to be cut. He pulled himself into his chair, muscles aching from age and old injuries. He rolled to the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Outside, 2 men in neon vests and ball caps stood at the base of his ramp. One was already guiding the saw through the top railing. Splinters sprayed into the wind like warning flares. There was no courtesy knock, no warning, just destruction, immediate and absolute. Frank slapped the window hard. "Hey!" he shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" One of the men looked up, shrugged like he'd seen it all before, and turned away. The other didn't bother looking at all. A white pickup idled by the curb, engine running. The logo on its side read Preferred Property Solutions. The clipboard on the dash was visible even from Frank's window, a single page with bold print at the top. Authorized removal, non-compliant structure. Frank's breath hitched. He fumbled for his phone, hands clumsy with urgency, but the touchscreen refused to respond to his shaking fingers. He dropped it, rolled to the door, tried the lock twice before getting it right. He threw it open. The smell of wet sawdust filled the air. The ramp, his ramp, was already half gone. "I need that to get out of the house," he yelled, his voice breaking at the edges. "I'm a disabled vet. Are you insane?" The taller worker, barely in his 30s, muttered something about just doing our job. Neither paused. Frank wheeled forward, the rubber catching on the doorway. The front step stared up at him like a cliff. 2 shallow stairs, but without the ramp, they might as well have been the Grand Canyon. He braced, tried to maneuver the wheels downward, an angle too steep, too quick. The chair tipped. He went back, hard. A sick crack tore through his shoulder. His head thudded against the doorframe. Then came the rain. At first it was mist, a whisper. Then heavier, the kind of cold that soaked instantly. He lay there, half on the threshold, one wheel spinning in the air, the other jammed against the stair. No one came. Behind curtains, blinds fluttered. Neighbors peeked. But not one door opened. Not one voice called his name. The ramp crashed behind him with a final groan. The saw silenced. The pickup drove off. And Frank, soaked to the bone, screamed, not in fear, not even in pain, but in pure, raw rage. The living room was dark, lit only by the dull blue glow of Frank's ancient iPad propped up on a stack of folded towels. The screen flickered with his own face, drawn, weathered, eyes rimmed red not from tears, but from the shame of letting them fall. He hadn't meant to speak. He hadn't meant to feel. But silence, he realized, had become a prison more unforgiving than the stairs outside his door. Rain still tapped the window like a cruel reminder. The spot on the floor where his chair had tipped hours earlier was still damp. His shoulder throbbed. A bruise swelled on the back of his head. And the ramp? Gone. Just splinters now, scattered like battlefield debris. He tapped record. It took a moment for him to find his voice. When it came, it was low, gravel thick, controlled, like the way he used to speak when radioing a medevac request with men bleeding beside him. My name is Frank Delaney. I served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 5th Marines. Lost my legs on a dirt road outside Da Nang. Came home with half a body and a full heart. I thought that meant something. He paused, jaw twitching, the words clawing upward now, no longer content to sit still. 3 days ago, my neighborhood HOA decided that my wheelchair ramp wasn't pretty enough, called it non-compliant, said it broke the aesthetic. Today, they came. Took it down while I watched. Didn't ask, didn't warn. Just destroyed the one thing keeping me from becoming a prisoner in my own home. His breath caught, just slightly. Then the tremble started. I built that ramp myself. Took me weeks. With one arm. Because the VA said modifications were my responsibility. I didn't complain. I never asked for pity. All I wanted was a way to check my mail, buy my groceries, maybe wave at my neighbors like a human being. He looked into the lens, not pleading, not weak, just tired. If this is what we've become, if this is what respect looks like for the people who fought for this country, then we've lost more than a ramp. We've lost our damn soul. He pressed stop, sat in silence. Then, without ceremony, he posted it. No hashtags, no edits. Just truth. He figured maybe Charlie from the VFW hall would see it. Maybe a few old friends. Instead, within hours, the digital tide turned. By midnight, it surged. Comments, shares, stitches. A video from a former army medic, eyes rimmed in fury, her voice trembling. This isn't just Frank. This is all of us. And somewhere in the quiet of that night, justice stirred. Saturday morning arrived like the eye of a storm, eerily still. The hydrangeas lining the manicured walkways of Woodridge Lane stood frozen in place, unaware that within the hour, everything about this quiet neighborhood was about to rupture. At 9:04 a.m., the first engine rolled in. A deep, thunderous growl from a Harley-Davidson Electra Glide, chrome flashing like a saber in the morning light. Behind it came more. Harleys, Indian Chiefs, old war jeeps, restored Humvees still wearing their desert scars. Pickup trucks with POW MIA flags rippling in the wind. A deuce-and-a-half army truck from the Korean War era. Then more. Dozens turned into hundreds. By 9:17, Woodridge Lane was unrecognizable. Over 200 veterans and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder on sidewalks and lawns, flanking the entire block. Some wore battle dress uniforms faded from memory, others leather jackets stitched with patches. 1st Cav, Desert Storm, Navy Seabees. A group of bikers had brought folding chairs and coolers, cracking open sodas like it was the 4th of July. No one shouted, no one pushed, but their presence carried the weight of thunderclouds, silent and looming. They hadn't come for violence. They'd come for witness. From her second-story window, Christine Parker watched with her arms crossed so tightly her nails dug crescents into her skin. Her phone trembled in her hand as she dialed the police. "They've blocked the street," she hissed into the receiver. "There's military trucks everywhere. This is a direct violation of—" But she was cut off. Officers were already there. 2 cruisers pulled up minutes later. Officers stepped out. One wore a purple heart hat, the other a Navy cross pin. They surveyed the crowd, then walked over to a group handing out coffee near a portable grill. "You folks staying peaceful?" the sergeant asked. A biker flipped a bratwurst with steel tongs and grinned. "Always." "Then we're just here to keep traffic moving." Christine stormed onto her porch. "Aren't you going to do something?" The sergeant looked past her. "Ma'am, seems like your HOA's already done enough." Then the crowd parted. 2 Marines in full dress blues emerged from the sea of veterans, wheeling a flag-draped chair between them. Frank sat upright, polished boots resting on the metal stirrups of his new wheelchair. His jacket was zipped tight, a fresh haircut lined clean above his ears. The moment his face came into view, applause erupted. Not polite clapping. Not the hollow sound of formality. This was a roar. Raw, rolling, rising from the gut of every man and woman who had ever been stepped on and told to thank the boot. Frank's lip trembled. His hands gripped the armrests. Tears cut 2 clean trails through the stubble on his cheeks. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They came with tool belts instead of rifles, hammers slung like sidearms, tape measures snapping like orders barked across a battlefield. By sunrise on Sunday, Woodridge Lane had transformed from a manicured suburb into something closer to a forward operating base. Only this time, the mission wasn't war. It was restoration. The old footprint of the ramp was still visible in the concrete, dark stains where splintered wood once stood like a silent accusation. But now, beneath the hands of veterans from every branch, something new began to rise. The lumber was thick, treated for storms, steel reinforcements anchored deep into the earth. Each bolt was tightened with precision, more reverent than technical. These weren't just men building a structure. They were soldiers rebuilding a brother's dignity. Frank sat to the side beneath a pop-up canopy someone had brought in from a VFW post. His wheelchair was parked in the shade. A Marine from the Gulf War pressed a cold bottle of water into his hand, while a Navy corpsman checked the bruising on his shoulder from the fall. Frank didn't speak much, didn't have to. Every nail driven into the new ramp echoed louder than any word he could offer. Halfway through the build, a black pickup pulled up. Out stepped a tall man in his late 50s with sawdust on his jeans and a folded blueprint under his arm. "Name's Garrison," he said with a Texas drawl thick enough to spread on toast. 20 years Navy. Heard about the nonsense and thought y'all could use a real carpenter." He unrolled a custom design for the rail. Thicker posts, cross-braced, stained mahogany. At the top, in bold, burn-etched script, Semper Fi. By noon, the smells of smoked, the room where it began, where Christine Parker once reigned with clipped syllables and a sharpened clipboard, was now full of tension, sharp enough to cut glass. The emergency HOA board meeting had drawn an unusual crowd, not just residents, but reporters, off-duty veterans, and a city attorney seated quietly in the back with a yellow notepad and a stare that made people sit straighter. Gone were the days of passive minutes and landscaping debates. This was something else. The board shuffled behind the folding table, visibly sweating beneath the overhead lights. The HOA president's chair was empty. Christine was a no-show, her resignation delivered in a tersely worded email 2 hours earlier. She'd cited personal attacks and an inability to continue serving amid hostile misrepresentation. But everyone knew better. Her silence was not retreat, it was collapse. A motion was made to vacate her position permanently. The vote was unanimous. Across town, Frank sat by his window as it all unfolded live on the evening news. His new ramp gleamed beneath the porch light, wide enough for 2 chairs to pass side by side, the steel reinforcements catching the glow like a silent salute. At the base of the railing, a single word had been carved in careful strokes. Semper Fi. But it was no longer just about a ramp. Frank's video, raw, tear-streaked, honest, had cracked open something deeper. It triggered a national re-examination of HOA power structures. Local governments launched hotlines for abuse reporting. Law clinics offered free services to elderly and disabled residents targeted by overzealous boards. Investigative reporters dug into similar violations. One in Arizona, where a blind woman was fined for obstructive signage after installing Braille street numbers. Another in Ohio, where a veteran was ordered to remove his American flag during renovations. The outrage reached the state legislature. Senator Marla Cain, herself a military widow, introduced a bill within days. The Delaney Amendment, soon dubbed simply Frank's Bill. It proposed sweeping changes, mandatory medical exemptions, federal-level ADA enforcement within HOA guidelines, and strict penalties for non-compliance. It passed committee with rare bipartisan fervor. The $5,000 fine against Frank? Voided. Publicly. Apologetically. The ramp? Photographed by newspapers. Toured by city officials. Framed on veterans' blogs as a monument not just to survival, but to resistance. And the house, Frank's quiet, weathered bungalow, was formally designated a community landmark. A small bronze plaque was drilled into the porch post, unveiled with a short speech and an honor guard. It read, "In this place a man stood, and a system bent." The auditorium lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting soft halos on the rows of folding chairs filled with veterans, families, and young recruits in ill-fitting uniforms. It wasn't a grand venue, just the local Veterans Affairs Center's main hall, its beige walls lined with black and white portraits of servicemen long since passed. But today, it felt like the heart of something bigger. Frank Delaney sat near the front, his wheelchair gleaming beneath an American flag draped over the edge of the small wooden stage. The back of his jacket still bore the worn, frayed outline of a Marine Corps emblem. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, fingers curled with age, but steady. The man who once blended quietly into the shadows of his neighborhood now commanded the room with the weight of his silence. A speaker finished introducing him. No fanfare, just the facts. Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient, advocate. The man who reminded the nation what respect truly looked like. Frank rolled to the podium slowly, not because of weakness, but because each turn of the wheel was deliberate, grounded, earned. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath as he adjusted the microphone with a knuckle scarred from decades past. He began without flourish. "I never wanted a fight." The room stayed hushed. I didn't want cameras or headlines. I didn't want my face in articles or bills or plaques. All I wanted was to check my damn mail without crawling. Soft laughter rose, edged with something deeper. Recognition. He continued, voice cracked but unwavering. But when they tore that ramp down, they weren't just tearing wood from nails. They were tearing at the idea that someone like me, someone broken, inconvenient, should keep existing out in the open. And when that happens, you've only got two choices: shrink or stand. A pause. I chose to stand. Applause began to ripple, slow at first, but growing, a rising current. Frank nodded once, eyes shining. Dignity isn't something you buy or demand. It's something you defend. And when it's torn down, whether it's a ramp, a home, a voice, you don't rebuild alone. You rebuild together. Now the room surged with applause, not polite, but thunderous, raw with feeling. Hands clapped, boots stomped. A few veterans stood with canes raised. There were tears in the front row. Later, outside, the sun slid gently across Frank's new ramp, steel, wood, and pride wrapped in one. Kids rode their bikes past it, unaware of what it had once cost. A bronze plaque caught the light. To the ones who served, and the ones who still fight, just to live free. The war had taken his legs, but the fight for dignity, that had given him wings.